Natalie Brooks sat motionless in her sedan, the underground parking garage stretching empty and cold around her. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the concrete pillars. Her watch showed 9:47 p.m. She couldn't remember the last time she'd left the office before dark. 3 weeks. Just 3 weeks since James Hartwell had taken over as chief executive officer. Natalie was already questioning every career choice that had led her to this moment. The box of personal items from her desk sat untouched in the back seat, a precaution she'd taken after today's disaster. The ASETA presentation that crashed and burned the conference room had been packed that afternoon. 17 people from various departments, all gathered to hear Natalie's pitch for the Henderson account, their largest potential client in 5 years. She'd spent 6 weeks developing the campaign, working through weekends, refining every detail until it sparkled. James had walked in 14 minutes late, his expression unreadable behind those steel-rimmed glasses. He'd listened for exactly 8 minutes before holding up one hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "This won't work," he'd said flatly. "The approach is too conventional. Henderson needs innovation, not recycled ideas from last decade's playbook." Natalie had felt the blood drain from her face as every person in that room turned to look at her. She'd tried to explain the strategy behind the conventional elements, how they built trust before introducing the innovative components later in the campaign. But James had already closed his laptop. "We're done here," he'd announced, standing up. "Natalie, please have something new on my desk by Friday." And that was 2 days away. 2 days to completely rebuild 6 weeks of work. The call that should never have happened now. Sitting in her car with trembling hands, Natalie pulled out her phone. The screen showed 8 missed calls from her direct supervisor. She's probably wondering where she'd disappeared to after the meeting. She ignored them all. She needed to hear her sister's voice. Emma always knew how to talk her down from these ledges, always had the right perspective to offer. Natalie scrolled through her recent calls, her vision blurred with exhaustion and unshed tears of frustration. She pressed what she thought was Emma's number and lifted the phone to her ear. 2 rings, 3. "Thank goodness." Natalie breathed out the moment someone answered. "I cannot even begin to tell you what just happened. I am so incredibly done with this place, with this job, with everything about this nightmare situation." The words poured out like water from a broken dam. This man, this new boss, he just demolished 6 weeks of my best work in front of everyone. Didn't even have the decency to review the complete presentation. Just decided in 8 minutes that months of research and strategy were worthless. I have never felt so disrespected, so undervalued in my entire career. Silence greeted her tirade. "Emma, are you still there? Please say something, because I'm about 2 seconds away from driving to the airport and buying a one-way ticket to literally anywhere else." The voice that stopped her heart. This isn't Emma. The voice was male, deep, and devastatingly familiar. Natalie's entire body went rigid. The phone nearly slipped from her suddenly sweaty palm. Her mind raced backward through everything she'd just said. Every word of venom she'd spat into what she'd thought was a safe, sisterly conversation. "Who is this?" she managed to whisper, though recognition was already settling over her like a suffocating blanket. "That's an interesting question," the voice replied, and she could hear something in it now. "Amusement, maybe? Curiosity? Considering you're the one who called me. Perhaps you should check your recent calls before launching into such passionate speeches about your workplace dissatisfaction." "Mr. Hartwell," the name came out as barely more than a breath. "Good evening." "Natalie," James said, his tone shifting into something she couldn't quite identify. "Please don't let me interrupt. You were explaining how done you were with everything. I find myself genuinely curious about the specifics." The panic sets in Natalie's mind went completely blank. She tried desperately to remember her exact words, but they all blurred together into one massive mistake. The parking garage felt like it was closing in, the concrete walls pressing closer. "I apologize profusely, Mr. Hartwell," she said, forcing her voice to steady even as her hands shook. This was a terrible mistake, a completely unintentional error. It will absolutely not happen again. Are you certain about that? His voice carried an odd quality now, something between professional distance and genuine interest. Because from what I overheard, you seemed quite certain about being done. I'd like to understand what exactly has pushed you to that point. As your chief executive, I think that's rather important information. Natalie closed her eyes, wishing desperately that she could rewind the last 5 minutes of her life. Delete them entirely. It was just frustration talking, Mr. Hartwell. End-of-day exhaustion. I didn't mean any of it. That's unfortunate. His tone shifted again, taking on an edge she couldn't interpret. I was rather hoping you might finally be honest with me about something. Genuine feedback is surprisingly difficult to obtain when everyone's afraid of saying the wrong thing. Before Natalie could respond, the line went dead. The aftermath, she sat frozen in the driver's seat, phone still pressed against her ear, listening to the empty silence. Her career was over, finished. There was no coming back from accidentally calling your brand new boss to complain about what a terrible boss he was, James. Hartwell wasn't known for his forgiving nature. According to office gossip, he'd already let go of 7 people during his first month. His standards were impossibly high, his patience non-existent. The industry whispered about his ruthless efficiency, his ability to cut through sentiment, and make the hard decisions without hesitation. And she'd just given him every reason to make her number. 8. Reaching out for reality after. Sitting paralyzed for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Natalie finally managed to dial the correct number. Emma answered immediately. Nat, what's wrong? I can hear it in your breathing. I just destroyed my entire career, Natalie said, her voice hollow. I called Hartwell instead of you and told him I was completely done with everything. I thought he was UM. I thought I was venting to my sister. And instead, I was confessing everything to the man who already thinks my work is garbage. Emma let out a long, low whistle on the other end. Oh no, what did he say? He said he wanted to know what specifically I was done with. Then he said something about wishing I would be honest with him. And then he just hung up. Natalie started her car, needing to get home, to be anywhere but this underground tomb. I have a meeting with him tomorrow morning at 8. His assistant sent the calendar invitation while I was sitting here having my breakdown. Subject line just says, discussion required. Maybe it won't be as catastrophic as you think, Emma offered, though even she didn't sound convinced. If he wanted to fire you immediately, wouldn't he have just done it during the phone call? That's not exactly comforting, Natalie replied, pulling out of her parking spot with mechanical precision. Maybe he wants to fire me in person. Make it official. Have security escort me out. Or maybe, Emma said carefully, he actually meant what he said about wanting honest feedback. Maybe this accidental call just opened a door you didn't know existed. Natalie wanted to believe that. But as she drove through the dark city streets toward home, all she could think about was updating her resume and preparing for the worst morning of her professional life. The voice was male, deep, and devastatingly familiar. Natalie's entire body went rigid. The phone nearly slipped from her suddenly sweaty palm. Her mind raced backward through everything she'd just said. Every word of venom she'd spat into what she'd thought was a safe, sisterly conversation. Who is this? She managed to whisper, though recognition was already settling over her like a suffocating blanket. That's an interesting question, the voice replied, and she could hear something in it now. Amusement, maybe? Curiosity? Considering you're the one who called me, perhaps you should check your recent calls before launching into such passionate speeches about your workplace dissatisfaction. Mr. Hartwell. The name came out as barely more than a breath. Good evening. Natalie, James said, his tone shifting into something she couldn't quite identify. Please, don't let me interrupt. You were explaining how done you were with everything. I find myself genuinely curious about the specifics. The panic sets in Natalie's mind went completely blank. She tried desperately to remember her exact words, but they all blurred together into one massive mistake. The parking garage felt like it was closing in, the concrete walls pressing closer. I apologize profusely, Mr. Hartwell, she said, forcing her voice to steady even as her hands shook. This was a terrible mistake, a completely unintentional error. It will absolutely not happen again. Are you certain about that? His voice carried an odd quality now, something between professional distance and genuine interest. Because from what I overheard, you seemed quite certain about being done. I'd like to understand what exactly has pushed you to that point. As your chief executive, I think that's rather important information. Natalie closed her eyes, wishing desperately that she could rewind the last 5 minutes of her life. Delete them entirely. It was just frustration talking, Mr. Hartwell. End of day exhaustion. I didn't mean any of it. That's unfortunate. His tone shifted again, taking on an edge she couldn't interpret. I was rather hoping you might finally be honest with me about something. Genuine feedback is surprisingly difficult to obtain when everyone's afraid of saying the wrong thing. Before Natalie could respond, the line went dead. The aftermath, she sat frozen in the driver's seat. Phone still pressed against her ear, listening to the empty silence. Her career was over. Finished. There was no coming back from accidentally calling your brand new boss to complain about what a terrible boss he was, James. Hartwell wasn't known for his forgiving nature. According to office gossip, he'd already let go of 7 people during his first month. His standards were impossibly high, his patience non-existent. The industry whispered about his ruthless efficiency, his ability to cut through sentiment and make the hard decisions without hesitation. And she'd just given him every reason to make her number. 8. Reaching out for reality after. Sitting paralyzed for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Natalie finally managed to dial the correct number. Emma answered immediately. Nat, what's wrong? I can hear it in your breathing. I just destroyed my entire career, Natalie said, her voice hollow. I called Hartwell instead of you and told him I was completely done with everything. I thought he was you, Em. I thought I was venting to my sister. And instead, I was confessing everything to the man who already thinks my work is garbage. Emma let out a long, low whistle on the other end. Oh no, what did he say? He said he wanted to know what specifically I was done with. Then he said something about wishing I would be honest with him, and then he just hung up. Natalie started her car, needing to get home, to be anywhere but this underground tomb. I have a meeting with him tomorrow morning at 8. His assistant sent the calendar invitation while I was sitting here having my breakdown. Subject line just says, discussion required. Maybe it won't be as catastrophic as you think, Emma offered, though even she didn't sound convinced. If he wanted to fire you immediately, wouldn't he have just done it during the phone call? That's not exactly comforting, Natalie replied, pulling out of her parking spot with mechanical precision. Maybe he wants to fire me in person. Make it official. Have security escort me out? Or maybe, Emma said carefully, he actually meant what he said about wanting honest feedback. Maybe this accidental call just opened a door you didn't know existed. Natalie wanted to believe that. But as she drove through the dark city streets toward home, all she could think about was updating her resume and preparing for the worst morning of her professional life. Part 2. The unexpected 10th sleepless night, Natalie didn't sleep. She lay in bed watching the ceiling fan rotate, counting the revolutions, running through endless scenarios of how the morning meeting might unfold. By 3 a.m., she'd mentally packed her desk 17 different ways. By 5 a.m., she'd drafted 4 different resignation letters, each one attempting to maintain some shred of dignity. At 6 a.m., she gave up on sleep entirely and headed to the shower. The hot water did nothing to wash away the dread that had settled into her bones. She chose her charcoal gray suit, the one Emma always said made her look powerful and professional. If she was going down, she'd go down looking competent. Her hands shook while applying mascara, making her redo it twice. The woman in the mirror looked pale, her green eyes shadowed with exhaustion. She pulled her auburn hair back into a low bun, not a single strand out of place. Armor, she thought. This is my armor. Arriving early to face the music, the office building looked different at 7:15 in the morning, quieter. The lobby echoed with her heels clicking against marble floors. The security guard, Thomas, gave her a sympathetic nod. Did everyone already know about her impending termination? She took the elevator to the executive floor, her stomach dropping with each ascending number. When the doors opened, she expected darkness and empty corridors. Instead, light spilled from the main conference room at the end of the hall. Natalie approached slowly, each step feeling like walking toward her own execution. Through the glass walls, she could see James Hartwell inside. Jacket draped over a chair, white shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms she'd never noticed before. He was studying documents spread across the conference table, a coffee cup steaming beside him. She knocked softly on the doorframe. "Not the meeting she expected, Natalie," James said without looking up. "You're 45 minutes early. I appreciate punctuality, but that's impressive, even by my standards." "Good morning, Mr. Hartwell," she replied, stepping into the room with her portfolio clutched like a shield. "About our phone conversation last night, I want to apologize again for I reviewed your proposal." He finally looked up, his dark eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "The Henderson campaign you presented yesterday." Natalie felt her heart hammering so hard she was certain he could hear it across the room. "Yes, sir. It's brilliant." The words hung in the air between them. Natalie blinked, certain she'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" James pushed the document across the polished table toward her. "Innovative strategy, thorough market research, and exactly the kind of bold approach Henderson needs. The conventional elements you incorporated aren't recycled ideas. They're psychological anchors that make the innovative components more palatable to conservative board members. It's sophisticated work." The truth behind the test, Natalie stared at the proposal, then at him, unable to process what was happening. "But yesterday you said it wouldn't work. You called it too conventional, said it was from last decade's playbook." "I did say that, didn't I?" James leaned back against the edge of the table, crossing his arms. For the first time since she'd met him, something that might have been a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I have a rather unconventional leadership approach that tends to make people uncomfortable. I sometimes reject strong work initially to gauge how deeply the creator believes in their vision." "You deliberately sabotaged my presentation?" Natalie felt anger cutting through her confusion. "In front of 17 people? Most people immediately accept my criticism without question," James continued, his expression thoughtful. "They assume I know better, that my rejection must be valid. They don't fight back, don't defend their work with conviction. But you," he gestured toward her with his coffee cup, "you called me in the middle of the night to tell me exactly how wrong I was. Accidentally, yes, but still. That wasn't fighting back," Natalie protested. "That was venting to who I thought was my sister." "Was it, though?" James set down his cup and moved around the table, closing some of the distance between them. "Or was it the first truly honest communication I've received since taking this position? Everyone here tells me what they think I want to hear. You told me what you actually thought. That's valuable, Natalie. That's rare." "A shocking proposal, so you're not firing me?" The question escaped before she could stop it, and James's expression shifted into something that might have been surprise. "For having passion about your work. For believing in your ideas strongly enough to be angry when they're dismissed?" He shook his head slowly. "That would be remarkably foolish. What I want is for you to present this campaign directly to Henderson next week, and I want you to start attending executive strategy meetings." Natalie felt the room tilt slightly. "Executive strategy meetings? But I'm just a marketing director. You're a marketing director with exceptional instincts and the courage to defend her vision." "Even if accidentally," James corrected. "Those qualities shouldn't be confined to middle management. I need people around me who will tell me when I'm wrong, Natalie. People who care enough about the work to fight for it." The beginning of something new, the following 3 weeks transformed Natalie's entire professional world. James began including her in discussions about company direction, asking her opinion on decisions that typically stayed far above her pay grade. The other executives watched with barely concealed curiosity and, in some cases, resentment. Catherine from finance cornered her in the break room one afternoon. "How did you manage to impress the Ice King so quickly?" "Most of us have been trying for months." Natalie thought about the accidental phone call, the midnight confession, the unexpected turn it had taken. "I honestly have no idea," she answered, which was at least partially true. Working closely with James revealed layers she hadn't expected. In meetings, he remained sharp and demanding, pushing everyone to think beyond obvious solutions. But occasionally, during late evening work sessions, when the office emptied around them, she'd catch glimpses of something else. A dry sense of humor. A surprising thoughtfulness about employee well-being, despite his stern reputation. a tendency to bring her coffee exactly how she liked it without being asked. Late night's intention, one Thursday evening. They were reviewing quarterly projections in his office. The city lights sparkled through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Natalie had long since kicked off her heels under the conference table. Her laptop screen illuminated her face in the dimming light. "Are you always this dedicated?" James asked, looking up from his own computer. "It's almost 9 o'clock. Most people would have left hours ago." "I could ask you the same question," Natalie replied without looking away from her spreadsheet. "You're here just as late as I am." "Fair point." She heard him stand, heard his footsteps on the carpet. Then he was behind her, looking at her screen over her shoulder. The proximity made every nerve in her body suddenly aware of his presence. His cologne, something subtle with cedar notes, seemed to fill the space between them. "Your analysis here about consumer behavior trends," he said, his voice closer than she'd expected. "It's exactly the kind of insight Henderson needs to see. You have a gift for reading between the data points, finding the human element in the numbers." Natalie turned her head slightly, intending to thank him, and found his face much closer than anticipated. For a moment, neither of them moved. His dark eyes held hers, and she saw something in them that made her pulse quicken. Something that had nothing to do with quarterly projections or marketing strategies. His phone buzzed sharply on the desk, shattering the moment. James stepped back immediately, the professional distance snapping back into place like a steel door closing. He crossed the room to answer the call, his tone crisp and businesslike. When he returned, the moment had evaporated as if it had never existed. "The invitation that changed everything. I need to discuss something with you," James said, his expression carefully neutral again. "The industry summit in Dallas next month. The board wants us to present your Henderson campaign as a case study in innovative client relationship management. U.S." Natalie's voice came out higher than intended. "You'll be presenting the creative strategy and execution. I'll be fielding questions about how this approach fits into our broader company vision." He met her eyes again, and she saw something unreadable in his expression. "It's a 3-day conference. My assistant will send you the details tomorrow morning." 3 days. The implication settled over her slowly. 3 days at a conference? With James, away from the office and its carefully maintained professional boundaries. "The presentation slot is quite prestigious," James continued, seemingly unaware of the direction her thoughts had taken. "This could be significant for your career trajectory, Natalie. And for the company's reputation in the industry." "Of course," she managed. "I'll prepare thoroughly. I have no doubt you will." He held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary. "You should go home and get some rest. Tomorrow will be busy." Driving home with questions, as Natalie drove home through the quiet city streets, her mind replayed the evening on an endless loop. That moment when he'd stood behind her, when she'd turned and found him so close, the way his expression had shifted into something almost vulnerable before the phone call interrupted them. She was treading into dangerous territory, and she knew it. James Hartwell was her boss, her CEO, the man who held her career in his hands. Getting involved with him would be complicated, messy, potentially devastating for her professional reputation. But there was something growing between them, something that went beyond the accidental phone call that had started this whole chain of events. She could feel it in the way he sought her opinion, trusted her judgment, looked at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention. Her phone buzzed at a red light. A message from an unknown number, but she recognized the tone immediately. "Prepare thoroughly for Dallas. This conference could change everything for both of us." There was no signature, but none was needed. Natalie saved the number to her contacts, her thumb hovering over the name field. After a moment's hesitation, she simply entered James. The light turned green, and she drove toward home, wondering what she was getting herself into and why the possibility excited her more than it. Probably should. The Dallas heat wrapped around Natalie the moment she stepped out of the airport terminal. A thick blanket of humidity that made her silk blouse cling to her skin immediately. Palm trees lined the curved driveway, swaying lazily in the breeze that carried hints of barbecue, smoke, and summer flowers. She'd arrived a full day before the conference officially began, using the extra time to rehearse her presentation until every word felt natural. Her rolling suitcase clicked rhythmically behind her as she approached the pickup area. Scanning for the car service James's assistant had arranged, a sleek black sedan waited at the curb, engine running. Before Natalie could confirm the license plate against her phone, the rear window rolled down, revealing James himself. He'd traded his usual crisp suit for khaki pants and a light blue button-down, sleeves rolled casually to his elbows. Sunglasses hid his eyes, but she could see the faint smile on his face. "I thought you might appreciate not navigating a strange city alone," he said, gesturing to the empty seat beside him. "Besides, we should probably coordinate our talking points before the reception tonight." "Thank you, Mr. Hartwell," Natalie replied, letting the driver load her bag into the trunk. She slid into the leather seat, immediately aware of how different this felt from their office interactions. More intimate somehow, despite the professional justification. "James," he corrected, removing his sunglasses as the car pulled away from the curb. "We're going to be spending considerable time together this week. Formality seems unnecessary outside the office, don't you think?" Settling into dangerous proximity, the hotel resort sprawled along a manufactured lake, all glass and white stone reflecting the afternoon sun. Their rooms were on the executive floor, and when the receptionist handed them their key cards, Natalie noticed they were sequential numbers, right next door to each other. "Conference organizers arranged the accommodations," James explained, as if reading her thoughts. "Apparently they assume everyone from the same company wants to stay close together. I can request a room change if it makes you uncomfortable." "No, it's fine," Natalie said quickly, though her heart was beating faster than it should. Completely professional. No problem at all. The elevator ride to the 11th floor felt longer than necessary. They stood side by side, not quite touching, both watching the numbers climb. Soft jazz played through hidden speakers, and Natalie became acutely aware of every breath, every slight shift of weight. "The reception with the conference organizers starts at 7, James said as they exited into the plush hallway. "Business casual dress code. Should we meet in the lobby around 6:45? "That works perfectly," Natalie replied, stopping at her door. His room was literally 3 feet away. She could already hear the faint sound of his key card beeping, his door opening. "Get some rest," he said, pausing in his doorway. "And Natalie? Try not to overthink the presentation. Your work speaks for itself." Preparation and proximity. Natalie spent the afternoon attempting to focus on her notes, but the thin hotel walls made concentration difficult. She could hear James moving around his room, his voice rising and falling during phone calls. Once, she heard him laugh at something, a sound she'd never heard in the office. Warm and genuine and surprisingly contagious even through the wall. At 6 o'clock, she gave up on work and focused on getting ready. The emerald dress she'd chosen hung perfectly. The fabric light enough for the Texas heat, but professional enough for an industry event. She left her hair down in loose waves, applied minimal makeup, slipped into her favorite heels. When she stepped into the lobby at precisely 6:45, James was already waiting near the fountain. He looked up as she approached, and something shifted in his expression. His eyes tracked her movement across the marble floor, and for a moment, he forgot to maintain his usual controlled demeanor. "You look beautiful," he said simply, as if the words had escaped without permission. Natalie felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the Texas climate. "Thank you. You clean up pretty well yourself." Dinner with undercurrents. The reception dinner was held in a private dining room overlooking the lake. 20 industry leaders filled the space with conversation and the gentle clink of wine glasses. Natalie found herself seated between James and a venture capitalist from Seattle, who wanted to discuss the future of digital marketing for an hour. James played his role perfectly. Charming and professional, steering conversations with practiced ease. But under the table, Natalie felt his knee bump against hers twice. The first time seemed accidental. The second time lasted a moment too long to be anything but intentional. "Your Henderson campaign sounds fascinating," said Patricia Nguyen, one of the conference organizers. "The preliminary materials suggest you've developed something truly innovative. How did you manage to convince such a conservative company to take risks?" Natalie launched into her explanation. Feeling James's attention on her, even as he appeared to be listening to someone else's conversation, she described the research process, the psychological anchoring technique, the careful balance between familiar and revolutionary. The truth is, James interjected smoothly, Natalie has a gift for understanding what clients need before they know it themselves. This campaign succeeded because she refused to accept conventional limitations. She pushed back against every obstacle, including my own initial skepticism. Their eyes met across the table, and Natalie saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. Pride, yes, but also something warmer. It's more personal. The walk that changed everything after dinner. Most of the group headed to the hotel bar for continued networking. James caught Natalie's elbow gently as they exited the dining room. Want to escape? He asked quietly. There's a walking path around the lake. It might be nice to get some air before tomorrow's chaos begins. They should have joined the networking session. It would have been the smart career move. But Natalie found herself nodding. Following him through the lobby and out into the warm evening, the path wound through carefully manicured gardens, lit by softly glowing lanterns that reflected off the lake's surface. The noise from the hotel faded behind them, replaced by the gentle sound of water lapping against the shore and the distant chirp of crickets. Can I ask you something? Natalie said after they'd walked in comfortable silence for several minutes. That day you rejected my presentation. Did you really plan that? Or are you just very good at making your mistakes seem intentional? James laughed, that same genuine sound she'd heard through the hotel wall. Honestly, a bit of both. I had concerns about aspects of the proposal, but I also wanted to see how you'd respond to criticism. Most people in this industry have learned to smile and nod, to never challenge authority. It makes for very boring meetings. So you deliberately antagonize people to keep things interesting. I push people to see if they'll push back, he corrected. There's a difference. Though I'll admit, your particular method of pushing back was unexpected. It reached a small dock that jutted out over the water. Without discussing it, they both walked to the end and stood looking out at the lights reflecting across the lake's surface. That phone call changed everything, Natalie said softly. I almost quit. I spent that entire night convinced my career was over. I know, James replied. I could hear it in your voice when you realized who you'd actually called. You sounded terrified. I was terrified. You have a reputation, James? People whisper about how many employees you've let go, how impossibly high your standards are. And yet here you are, not only still employed but presenting at one of the industry's most prestigious conferences. He turned to face her, his expression serious in the dim lantern light. Do you know why I really reviewed your proposal that night? After our accidentally honest phone call? Natalie shook her head, not trusting her voice. 'Cause for the first time since taking this job, someone had shown me genuine emotion. Real frustration, real passion, real belief in their work. Everyone else performs for me, Natalie. They show me the version of themselves they think I want to see. But you forgot to perform just for a moment, and I heard something true. The confession on the dock? What are we doing? The question escaped before Natalie could stop it. This conference? These late nights at the office? This walk? What is this? James was quiet for a long moment, his hands gripping the dock railing. Honestly, I've been asking myself the same question for weeks. This wasn't supposed to happen. What wasn't? This. He gestured between them, a helpless motion that seemed uncharacteristic. You. The way I find myself looking for excuses to extend meetings when you're presenting. The way I've started making sure there's good coffee available late at night because I know you'll be working. The way I stood outside your hotel room door for 5 minutes earlier, trying to convince myself not to knock, just to continue whatever conversation we were having in the car. Natalie's heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. James, I'm your boss, he continued, his voice rough with frustration. Your CEO, getting involved with you, would be complicated, potentially damaging to your career. People would assume you'd slept your way to the executive strategy meetings. They'd question every promotion, every opportunity I gave you. It would be messy and difficult, and probably a terrible idea. Probably, Natalie agreed, taking a step closer to him. And yet you're telling me this anyway. 'cause apparently I'm tired of performing too. He turned to face her fully, his dark eyes intense in the lantern light. Because that accidental phone call opened a door I didn't know I wanted opened. Because you're brilliant and passionate and brave. And I can't stop thinking about what might happen if we stopped pretending there isn't something growing between us. The decision point, the night air seemed to hold its breath around them. Natalie knew this was a pivotal moment, the kind that would determine not just the next few days, but potentially the entire trajectory of her career and personal life. We should be careful, she said finally. Professional. Keep appropriate boundaries. We absolutely should, James agreed. This could complicate everything. The presentation tomorrow, our working relationship, the entire company dynamic. It definitely would. Make assumptions. It could undermine everything I've worked for. Without question, Natalie took another step closer until they were nearly touching. And yet I don't want to walk away from this. From whatever this is. James exhaled slowly, something like relief washing over his features. Neither do I. So what do we do? We're careful, Natalie said firmly. We're professional in public. We don't let this affect our work or compromise either of our positions. But we also stop pretending we don't feel this. We see where it goes, honestly, without performing for each other or anyone else. That's a very rational approach to something that feels decidedly irrational, James said. And she could hear the smile in his voice. One of us has to be rational. And since you're the one who tests people by intentionally rejecting their best work, I figured I should take the lead on the reasonable planning. He laughed then, genuine and warm, and reached out to tuck a strand of her hair behind her ear. The gesture was tender, intimate in a way that made her breath catch. We should get back, he said softly. We both need rest before tomorrow, and if we stay out here much longer, I'm going to forget all about being careful and professional. The presentation triumph the next morning dawned bright and clear. The conference hall buzzed with hundreds of industry professionals, all gathered to hear about innovative approaches to client relationships. Natalie stood backstage, her notes clutched in slightly sweaty hands, trying to remember how to breathe normally. James appeared beside her, looking calm and collected in a charcoal suit. Ready? Terrified, she admitted. What if they hate it? What if I forget everything the moment I step out there? Then you'll improvise. It's the same way you did during our executive meeting 3 weeks ago when Thompson tried to undermine your budget projections. James's hand found hers briefly. A quick squeeze of encouragement hidden from the backstage crew. You're extraordinary at this, Natalie. Trust yourself the way I trust you. When her name was called, Natalie walked onto that stage with her head high. The lights were bright. The audience was massive. But she thought about that midnight phone call, about the accidental honesty that had changed everything. She thought about James's words the night before, about stopping the performance and showing something real. So she did exactly that. She presented the Reese Anderson campaign not as a perfect success story, but as a journey of pushing boundaries, facing rejection and believing in vision even when others doubted. She talked about the importance of authentic conviction, of leaders who tested you because they wanted to see you defend your beliefs. The audience was captivated. Questions came rapid-fire during the panel discussion. James fielded inquiries about company culture and leadership philosophy with his usual articulate precision. But Natalie noticed him watching her throughout, pride evident in every glance. When they finally left the stage to thunderous applause, she felt like she was floating celebration and revelation that evening. James suggested dinner at a small restaurant away from the conference hotel, away from colleagues and industry connections. They sat in a quiet corner booth, the day's triumphs still buzzing between them. You were magnificent today, James said, raising his wine glass. That story about facing rejection and trusting your instincts? I assume you meant the presentation I initially dismissed? Among other things, Natalie replied, clinking her glass against his. Sometimes the best moments come from the biggest mistakes, like accidentally calling your boss instead of your sister. Exactly like that. James set down his glass, his expression growing serious. I need to tell you something. About why I took this job. Why I push people the way I do. Over dinner, he opened up in ways she'd never expected. He talked about his previous company, how he'd surrounded himself with yes people who told him what he wanted to hear right until the moment. A major product launch failed spectacularly. He described the humbling experience of realizing his leadership style had created an environment where honest feedback was impossible. I came to your company determined to build something different, he explained. A culture where people could disagree without fear, where passion mattered more than politics. But it's lonely, Natalie. Testing people, pushing back, always wondering if anyone will ever be genuine with me. And then some exhausted marketing director accidentally called you at 10 o'clock at night to tell you exactly how terrible her day had been. Natalie finished, and suddenly nothing felt lonely anymore. The new beginning, they returned to the hotel as the sun set over Dallas, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. At Natalie's door, James paused, his hand resting on the wall beside her. Tomorrow we go back to the office, he said quietly. Back to meetings and professional boundaries and all the complications we discussed. Tomorrow, Natalie agreed. But tonight we're still in Dallas. Still away from all of that? Is that an invitation? It's an observation. What you do with that observation is entirely up to you. James smiled, that rare, genuine expression that transformed his entire face. You know, I'm starting to think that accidental phone call was the best mistake either of us ever made. Definitely the most interesting one, Natalie replied, unlocking her door. Though I reserve the right to make more interesting mistakes in the future, I'm counting on it. They stood in the hallway for another moment, the space between them charged with possibility and promise. Finally, James leaned in and kissed her forehead, tender and sweet and full of restraint.
Good night, Natalie.
Get some rest. Good night, James. As she closed her door, Natalie leaned against it, smiling at the ceiling. Her phone buzzed with a message. Thank you for being brave enough to accidentally call me that night. Thank you for showing me something real. Tomorrow, we'll figure out how to navigate this carefully and professionally. But tonight, I just wanted you to know that I'm falling for you, and I'm not afraid of it anymore. Natalie saved the message, then typed her response. I'm falling too, and I'm not afraid either. Through the wall, she heard his phone chime with her reply. Then she heard him laugh, that wonderful sound that still made her smile. The conference continued for one more day. They presented together, fielded questions as a team, and celebrated their success with colleagues and industry leaders. To everyone watching, they were the picture of professional collaboration. But in the quiet moments between sessions, in the brief touches and knowing glances, they built something real. On the flight home, sitting side by side in first class, James reached over and took her hand under the armrest where no one could see, ready to figure out how this works. He asked, "With you?" "Absolutely." The plane climbed into the clouds, carrying them back toward their regular lives, toward the complications and challenges they'd discussed, but also toward something neither had expected to find. A genuine connection born from an accidental phone call and nurtured through honest vulnerability. Sometimes the biggest mistakes lead to the best beginnings, and sometimes the person who challenges you the most turns out to be exactly the person you need.